All right, so there is an article that I wanted to read and talk about with you. It's going to be a little intense, guys, but it's not going to be a long one. It's either divine intervention because someone needs to talk about this, or it's Satan playing with me to be like, look what I did. I don't know, guys, but here we are. All right, so this is the article. It's from Informed Comment, and it's titled, "Sorry, White Nationalists, Europeans were black until the rise of Rome. And Rome was multiracial." And this is not just about this, because I know what you're thinking. Oh, come on, Metatron, not another one about black and race. No, no, no. I had a look at this. That's what I thought it was. And of course, I would have debunked it normally. It's a lot worse than that. How about we check out this absolute nonsense? I'm actually surprised that they put white in capital, because normally current university curricula specifically demand, or should we say suggest, for us to put white lowercase and black uppercase. I'm not joking. I've demonstrated it on so many videos. So for whatever reason, they forgot to do that. But anyways, Ann Arbor Informed Comment. "We live in a time when a once level-headed anti-populist politician such as J.D. Vance has increasingly adopted the language of white nationalism," okay, never mind, scratch that, signing on to the great replacement theory that nefarious forces, often coded as Jewish, are bringing in immigrants to replace white Americans, attacking multiculturalism, and aligning himself with Christian theocratic nationalism. So, okay, there is already so much to unpack here. And one thing we're going to do after I present my counter arguments to already 17 things that they said in this brief paragraph, we're going to have a look at who this is. Language of white nationalism already is strange because you have to be specific. What are you talking about? Because one thing is saying stuff like we are superior and that kind of stuff. But oftentimes scumbags like this simply say something like it's okay to be white. Deus vult, white supremacist language. They will take things that are fine and they will tell you, no, this is hard coded, you're not supposed to say it. So already, if you make an attack and you don't show me what you're attacking, I think you're lying. Signing to the great replacement theory, I'll talk about this in a little bit. Nefarious forces, Jewish, bringing immigrants to replace. Why is white in quotation marks? I wish people started to know how to use quotation marks. So quotation marks, first and foremost, need to be used to quote. There is no quoting here. No one has said this. So the other way quotation marks are often used is to be like, they're so-called, but they're not. What are you talking about? Of course there are white Americans. But people like this, Mr. Juan Cole, people like this want to tell you that white people don't exist. And white culture doesn't exist. And so that's why they now decided to put white in quotations. Thing is, though, it's kind of beyond me at a logical level how people who complain about white people every day, all day, and make white people the cause of literally everything can at the same time tell you that white people don't exist. Because if white people don't exist, then why the heck are you blaming white people for everything? You see where I'm going with this? Why is multiculturalism in quotations, you absolute clown of an article writer? And before you say, oh, but this is probably some imbecile who doesn't know how to write articles. No, this is a professor. This is a university professor. Okay? So excuse me if I expect someone to know how to use quotation marks. Why are you putting multiculturalism in quotations? What would be the reason for this? What are you trying to tell us? Does multiculturalism not exist either? Or are you what is he trying to say? And aligning himself with Christian theocratic nationalism. Look, I am a fervent, ultra-convinced Christian. I myself am not in favor of theocracies because a theocratic government, it depends how it's established. But if we look at other theocratic governments, for instance, Iran, didn't go so well. Now, I do believe that if you had to choose between living under a theocratic Christian nation or a theocratic Muslim nation, the Christian nation is objectively the better choice for anyone who isn't Christian. 100%. For women, for LGBTQ people, for gay people. Anyway, that's a fact. It is a fact. But still, I wouldn't consider it optimal because I personally prefer the distinction between state and church. And I wish for the state not to intervene in church matters. And therefore, at the same time, I don't want church to intervene in state matters. And I prefer individual freedom when it comes to that. You'll see why I said this in a second. that his wife Usha, here we are, is from India, is inconvenient to this shift of course. Now, I would say that his wife Usha being from India is a demonstration that this shift has never happened. How can the guy be a white nationalist if he married a brown woman? The shameful great replacement theory now embraced by Vance was invented by a French Nazi who considered all Americans N-word. Not really the N-word, but I'm not going to risk it. Whiteness is a term with a checkered history. As a historian, so this guy, I swear, academia, we are losing academia, and anyone who denies that is into the propaganda at this point. You're supposed to be neutral. You're supposed to present facts, and you're not supposed to push politics. And this is what this person is doing. Name again on the screen for everyone to see. To shame. If it were up to me, I would strip all of these activists. Not only I would fire them en masse whenever they expose their, but not that they can't have their own politics. Of course you can. You're free in a free country. You're free to have any political view that you want. And I don't even care about big shot professors to go on Twitter and go nuts. Absolutely, freedom of speech. But when you use your position, your authority, and your degrees to push your politics in a way that is clearly disingenuous, and then you're going to use the teaching environment and the trust that the state, people, the American people in this case, and the British people gave you to teach the children, absolutely not. Stripped of those titles at that point. You're a PhD, you don't have it anymore. I would argue that it is an objectively meaningless construct, he says. It is only meaningful, like any political identity, in a carefully crafted context and through various sleights of hand. So what he's arguing now is that whiteness is a construct. So basically, white people don't exist, and what they say to justify this, these clowns, is that they tell you, look, if you're white, right, you could be an American of European descent, you could be Nordic, Scandinavian, you could be from Western Europe, you could be from Central Europe, maybe you're Czech, maybe you're French, maybe you're Italian. I mean, who is considered white is a matter of debate. I understand that. But what these people say is that, no, it doesn't make sense because all these people have different languages, different culture. Thereby, the idea that they are all white when they are like European or of European ancestry, in the case of Americans, Australians, then it doesn't make sense because there isn't a one single white culture, there isn't a one single white language, thereby whiteness doesn't exist. Problem is they never do it with black people. And that's when I call out their hypocrisy. Because the reality is that at least you think someone from Nigeria, someone from Congo, someone from Cote d'Ivoire, someone from South Africa, being a black South African rather than a white South African, do you think people from all these different areas of the continent that is Africa have all the same culture? Do you think they all look the same? Do you think they all speak the same language? Do you think they have the same history? No, they don't. So if you apply that, in fact, did you know that there are more African countries than there are European countries? The number is higher. So if anything, then blackness makes less sense than whiteness at that point. So either you apply it consistently, and before they say it's because of phenotypic trait difference, there is more phenotypic trait difference in black population than there is in white populations. I know that this might sound strange to you. We Europeans are more diverse when it comes to immediately identifiable colors. Like, because we can be blonde, we can be brunettes, we can be redhead, we can have blue eyes, we can have green eyes, right? But when you talk about phenotypic trait and in fact genetic diversity, then there is more of that within African population clusters, which is why oftentimes even the CDC or in general, if you're looking at genomic sequencing or any kind of disease research, Africa is a good place to do that because you can see how specific genetic components of viruses or whatever it is act on different populations with different genetic backgrounds. Suffice to say, this idea that, oh, it doesn't make sense to say white people and put all different groups, if you say that, but then you're fine with black people as a whole, as a human classifier, you're a fraud. And science says that. Let's continue a little more, and then I'll tell you something about this guy. This big shot professor, big shot. I have pointed out that Ben Franklin only considered the English white, dismissing Swedes as tawny and Germans as swarthy. True, I think there are still some Americans that have a little bit of a restrict. Like, for instance, I do sometimes run into Americans that tell me you're not white because I'm Southern European. But a lot of people don't use that Benjamin Franklin form of understanding of what to be white means. I mean, according to those, yeah, even Greeks, Italians, and Irish, how can Irish of all people, they're as white as my headphones, but whatever. To me, someone who is European is white. It's just how I use it. Already when we go into Semitic, I mean, I wouldn't consider an Arab white. They are Semitic. We have their own, we have a classifier for that. And at the end of the day, classifiers, although some do have white skin, so maybe we could argue in that if you wanted, but personally, I think white is European. That's the way I use it. Right. Anyways, in the 20th century, working class Italians, Greeks, and Irish were gradually admitted to whiteness, which had in the 19th century been associated with Protestantism. That's true. Middle and upper class status and Northern European origins. That is, whiteness in America was always mostly about class and religion and unfree, antecedent rather than about skin color. Right, but that's not the case now. That is not the case now, if not in some fringe elements. So who cares? Even black changes. I mean, if you think about it once again, this is how I'm going to combat this. Look at the skin color of some Africans that we consider to be black. You will find the exact same hue of skin in India. Exactly the same. Yet the Indians are not considered black. So it's not just a matter of skin. It is also a matter of culture. It is. I mean, it's even with black. Once again, defeated at the roots of the argument. Some African Americans have a lighter complexion than most Mediterranean populations. Have you ever been to the Mediterranean? Because that's where I'm from. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. Arabs were admitted to whiteness in the early 20th century by the courts, I see. Though after September 11, their whiteness was often revoked, I see. For some reasons, now we're going to talk about ICE. Before we do that, how about we look into this guy? Who is this big shot professor that is now talking about all this nonsense? Juan Cole is the founder and chief editor of Informed Comment. He is Richard P. Mitchell's distinguished university professor. Distinguished, guys. I told you, academia is gone. In the history department at the University of Michigan, he's the author of, among many other books, Muhammad, Prophet of Peace Amid the Clash of Empires, and the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. So look at this book. A new translation from Persian, okay? Follow him on Twitter at Absolutely Not, or the Informed Comment Facebook page. You know what? I might actually have a look at his Twitter. That's why he hates Christian nationalism and J.D. Vance and all that stuff. Okay. Now it's all clear. ICE has not gone after the thousands of undocumented Irish in the Boston area or other white undocumented immigrants, but only after those coded brown on black demonstrated that Stephen Miller's project is a racialist one, not purely about immigration or undocumented immigration. I'm confused. What is he talking about? Because the majority of Italian Americans are second generation at this point, if not third. So I'm already a little confused with this. Thousands of undocumented Irish in Boston from when? Because you can't compare the actions that happened like a long time ago with what is happening now, particularly after the significant waves of immigration. I mean, if you look at the different percentages, in California, the population has completely changed. Like the percentages are staggering of the amount of immigrants that are in there, many of which are indeed undocumented. So this is apples and pears. This is not even apples and pears. This is pizza and apples. One of the symbols of whiteness for Americans constructing a white identity is Europeanness. Yes, especially Northern Europeanness. Whatever, but I would say Europeanness in general. It should be remembered that Adolf, initially rebuffed Benito Mussolini's offer of an alliance because he did not consider Italians white. That simplifies it monstrously. That simplifies it in a way that it almost makes me want to vomit. And World War II is not my area of expertise. And kept hoping that instead it could conclude an alliance with Britain. To say that this is just because of who the Austrian painter thought was white and who wasn't is ridiculous. Like, so you think that there was no like the advantages of having Britain on your side from a geopolitical standpoint when you were already having to deal with the Russians and you tried to kind of make a pact at first, but then they're a danger. What are we going to do? I don't want to fight left and right. This is ridiculous. This is the level of ignorance. This is per professor, guys. Unbelievable. The bad news for white nationalism is that Europe's genetic history has revealed the Europeans were mostly dark-skinned until the first millennium BC. And even then, first millennium BC is ridiculous. You're out of your mind. Whiteness advanced slowly. But you said whiteness doesn't exist. This belatedness of light complexions has been demonstrated by a scientific paper just this year. All of this just to foster anti-white racism. This is what this is, guys. An anti-Christian sentiment for obvious reasons. It summarizes the paper of Professor Perretti and colleagues. Researchers at the University of Ferrara in Italy studied the genomes of 348 people who lived between 45,000 and 1,700 years ago. Across Europe and Western Asia, their findings show that about 62% of ancient Europeans had dark skin. Right, but you mother... The intellectual dishonesty. The majority of Europeans, first millennium BC, majority of Europeans, guys, were black-skinned, they were dark-skinned. And then they include data from 45,000. You absolute clown. Oh, what a clown. What an absolute clown. Only 8% had pale skin, the rest are tones in between. Even that, the rest are tones in between. So if you have someone who is a little tanned, would you include that into white? Because you should. Unbelievable. I don't even know how people like this post this kind of stuff, teach it at universities, push their freaking books full of lies, and the university are fine. The university is like, yep, this is good, absolutely great, fantastic, we support that, we push it, we love it. The Otzi Iceman, I'm going to flip the table today. Otzi the Iceman from circa 3000 BC is both one of Europe's oldest preserved mummies and one of the darkest Europeans known. Reconstructions of him have made him look white, which is just ideology, not science. And yet, joke professors like this clown, will not note that what happened in reverse in Britain, where one of the oldest Brittonic skeleton was found, southern England, and everywhere they said she was black, and they made a plaque, these fucking virtuous signaling clowns, they made a plaque to say, look, this is the first black Brittonic, even if the person was of African descent, that doesn't make them a Briton. It could be someone who, I'm not saying necessarily a slave, it doesn't have to be a slave, it could be a slave, but it doesn't have to be a slave. Maybe someone who intermarried. No one is saying, you need the data to show that, but I'm not saying it necessarily has to be a slave. But that doesn't make them Brittonic, it makes them a foreigner who moved there to live in that area. There is movement in the Mediterranean basin because the Mediterranean is a conduit of civilization, movement, trade, and all of that. And then all the way up to Britain as well, movement occurred. Regardless, that's what they did. They made the plaque. All the universities pushing it. Look, they have been here building Britain. So, and the reason why they say that, of course, is to say, so it's the new immigrant waves. They've actually been here since the freaking Mesolithic, since the Iron Age. So you should accept the continuous waves of immigration. That's what it is. Then they develop a new technique that is a lot more reliable. They test the DNA. She was blonde with blue eyes. It took them 5 years to remove the plaque. Do you think they did erect a plaque to... Well, look at this woman at this point. We've got a very ancient woman, Britain, why don't we... No, but he calls out the ideology, does he? Modern Europeans are immigrants. Oh man, I swear I didn't read this. I swear I did not read this. But doesn't this just confirm everything I just said? Modern Europeans are immigrants since much of Europe was not inhabited during the last ice age. All right, so answer me this question, Ultra Professor Emeritus. Where are Europeans native of? Where are our native lands? Where on this planet, green planet Earth, can we call ourselves indigenous of? I would say Europe and Britain. Definitely the Icelandic population. How are they not? Since when did the Norse from the Scandinavian Nordic countries, when they moved to Greenland, you know what they found? Absolutely fucking nothing. There was grass. There weren't even trees. 1.1% was arable land. That's what they found. How are they not native? At this point, guys, it's Orion. We're from space. Europe was not inhabited during the last ice age, the glacial maximum of which lasted from roughly 29,000 to 11,700 years ago. After that, African... So how are you collecting samples from 45,000 years ago? Then it's a little beyond me. After that, Africans and people from what we now term the Middle East came in to repopulate the continent. They were black. They came from places... By the way, the question is, were they black? Note that is not... uppercasing the B, cardinal sin for these people. They came from places closer to the equator where UV rays were strong and dark pigmentation blocked them, reducing the danger of genetic damage to Right, okay, we understand. Unbelievable. These people think you're idiots. He's literally explaining to you why black people come packed with melanin. I think we can understand that it's because it's a resistance to the sun, thank you very much. I don't think you need to explain that to us, do you? I think an elementary student will understand that it's a reaction to the intense sunlight. I know that when he wrote this, he was cringing. He was like, oh my gosh, why the snow? There he readily concludes in archaeology news, dark skin was replaced much more slowly in Europe than had been earlier thought. Why? It turns out that diet is also important. European hunters and gatherers ate food like meat, fish, and wild plants, which were relatively high in vitamin D. And so they could survive even at northern latitudes with weak UV rays. The diet of prehistoric Europeans is actually something I'd be very interested to figure out, because how can anyone survive without pasta and pizza? With that being said, I don't believe a word that comes from this guy or anyone he quotes. So I'm just going to disregard anything he says at this point, because there were too many lies already. Oh, I just saw Elagabalus. Ooh, I got to read that. What is he saying about Rome? White Europeans, in the sense of light-complected ones, you didn't have to specify that, you clown, are a recent historical phenomenon. And of course, in Southern Europe, people are generally darker. People that say this have never been to Southern Europe. Yes, there are some Southern Europeans that are tanned, absolutely. There are also blondes with blue eyes. I don't know what glory there is in being light-skinned descendants of black people because of resettling of northern climates, the condescending attitude. At the least, is exulting in whiteness is the sense would mean demanding your own ancestors and family line. All those Americans who think of Rome several times a day should be aware that Romulus and Remus, the mythical figures whose stories wrote up with the founding of Rome, couldn't have gotten served in a restaurant in the American South in 1950s. So he's saying that Romulus and Remus, who are mythological, but if they were real, they would be black. Come on. The Romans, and even before that, the Etruscans. We know what the Etruscans looked like, right? How do we know? Because they drew themselves. You have a variety between light-skinned and tanned. That's the Etruscans. Does this person here look black to you? And remember that the Etruscans predate the Romans. The Romans and Etruscans at the very beginning were kind of fighting each other for dominance. There are plenty of cities that were under Etruscan control, then they get under Roman control, then they get against under Etruscan control. Okay, so that's a thing. So what this tells us is that this is the skin tone of someone who tans because he spends time outside. But this is the natural skin tone of the people that stay inside. And sometimes, in fact, there are philosophers that are represented with a lighter skin tone because they have a reason as to why they don't need to do the physical stuff that other people do. We know they represented themselves and they look white, Mediterranean. That's what they look for the majority. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but the Romans used colors to categorize people. And usually they categorize black people as Ethiopians, which means burnt face. And when I say Ethiopians, it doesn't mean people from Ethiopia, it just means black people as a whole. Of course, in recognition of what this guy is saying, the sun is burning their skin so that they look darker. Literally, the Romans understood it had to do with the weather. It's not like that you need to be a modern biologist to understand that, or a genetist. They saw themselves as white. There are at least 3 Latin terms that translate into white. That's how they considered Mediterranean people. Now, given, I'm not going to be intellectually dishonest and tell you that that's the same way as we use white modernly. Obviously not. But they did use that term. The Nordics, they called them blondes. So they did see a difference. They did say that, for instance, the average German had a candida cute, so a very white skin. So they would have been even lighter than the Mediterraneans, and there was prevalent blondism in those areas as opposed to the Mediterranean that even today, that is not to mention that the Roman Empire was both among the greatest empires in history and the most multicultural. Yeah, so when it comes to the multiculturalism of ancient Rome, let's stop this idea that the Romans were inclusive in a modern sense. Yes, Roman citizenship was open to non-Romans, regardless of cultural and ancestral background. However, who it was open to changes depending on who was in power in the politics. It's not like throughout the entirety of Roman history, anyone was accepted and could become. No, in fact, there are specific discourses, for instance, between Emperor Claudius and his Senate, where they are in fact complaining. They're like, we don't want the Gauls, the Senate says. And then Claudius is like, why not? They bring in money. Let's get their aristocrats. It's fine. Let's give them citizenship. So they literally complained. So not all Romans were okay with letting former enemies gain citizenship. And in the majority of cases, when they do, like when the emperor is pushing for, no, let's get them, he always gives a reason of profit. At its height, it ruled from Morocco to the Caucasus and from Spain to what is now Turkey. It included Arabophone peoples, Aramaic speakers, Grecophone populations, Anatolian speakers of Iranian languages, Basque, Goths, Celts, and Etruscans, along with Romans. When the Romans conquered Syria, they admitted its elites to their aristocracy. Elites, even the liar knows this. To their aristocracy, and had as emperors Philip the Arab, yes, as well as Elagabalus and Severus Alexander, both from Emesne dynasty, from homes in Syria, as well as Caracalla, whose mother was from the Syrian Arab family of the Severans. So, if you don't know the specific history of each and every single one of these, you will think, well, I mean, it sounds like the Romans were okay, even if the emperor wasn't Roman. First and foremost, I have done a deep study to counter another professor, and I showed it on screen, and I put it in red, all the emperors that were of Italic descent. Then I put, from Rome directly. Then I put in green all the ones that were not from Rome, they were from somewhere else, but the whole family was from Rome, so you might as well. It doesn't matter that it was born in freaking North Africa or in Africa proconsularis, if you want to use the technical term. It doesn't matter because he's still a Roman. Who cares at that point? And then I put in another color, I think it was blue, the ones who were actually 100% quote-unquote barbarian, meaning that they had citizenship, but they had no connection to Rome, and you will see that the numbers are a lot smaller than what these clowns make you think. The majority of Roman emperors were either directly from Rome, or they were from a Roman family, or at least half connections, like maybe half and half. Why are they mentioning these people? To tell us, look how inclusive. Elagabalus was from Syria, and the Romans accepted him. Yet they failed to say that he was beheaded after a couple of years, together with his mother, and the Praetorian Guard threw them in the river. The inclusivity! So uplifted by the inclusivity of the Romans. Man, everyone is treated equally. I freaking love it. Anyways, this is the article, and disgusting. Absolutely, as usual. This is academia, ladies and gentlemen, and I will fight it with every fiber of my being. Because this is a bunch of lies.